Happy Monday. Well, I don't know if it's a happy Monday. If you were part of the initial live stream of this episode on Monday, July 29th, you know it was not a very happy 8 or 9 minutes. I did a part of a show, but nobody could actually hear it. It was very choppy. As Craig said on the other side of the glass, it sounded like Stephen Hawking. But I think that was actually offensive to Stephen Hawking. It was so choppy. It was the worst thing I think we've ever put together in terms of content at Crossing Broad. And that, admittedly, there's been a low bar. There have been some poor bits of content put out over the years. But I will say right now that unless there is complete and utter calamity, we should be fine. This is now no longer a live episode. Well, it kind of is. If you're watching on YouTube after this video has gone up, I won't be able to pull up your comments on the screen because it's live to you, but it's not live to me. And if you're listening in the podcast feed and you're like, what the hell's going on? Just ignore all of it. But what I will tell you is that before we get into today's show, I'm going to do a cheap plug because if you listen to this show, which very many of you do in the podcast feed, and a decent number of you do watch live on YouTube and on X and on Facebook, if you haven't done so already, go find the Russ Joy Show. I go live with that show every Tuesday and Friday morning at 8 a.m. or about 8 a.m. Sometimes I run on Russ Joy time, RJT. But for the most part, 8 a.m. every Tuesday and Friday. You can find it on YouTube at The Russ Joy Show. You can find it where you get your podcasts. It is The Russ Joy Show. It's very easy to find. It's a lovely show. A lot of interaction. We talk about Philly sports. We talk about national sports. Sometimes we go off the beaten path. We talked about the election a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't like some kind of biased nonsense sake. It was from a neutral observer. I was like, oh, what would an open convention look like? And then I came on and I was like, oh, after Joe Biden dropped out and everything, I was like, oh, I was at the art museum with my family and I'm watching all these people starting to realize what was happening and that he was dropping out and watching all the young people get the news right away and all the old people having the word of mouth. It was a whole thing. But we talk about that stuff on that show because it's fun. It's an enjoyable thing. It's a non-biased. We report, you decide. I don't know. We have fun. Anyway, let's get into today's show. It's the second time now that I will try to get into the same points that I tried to get into before. And now I have a sump pump thing that's going off. Craig, if you can hear it, I guess we'll have to remove that. But if not, I'm just we're gonna rock and roll. It's an absolute masterclass of a show today. This is the kind of content that you can always come to expect on a Monday here on Crossing Broadcast. Okay, the Phillies are in the midst of a disastrous stretch. They are, truly. There is no way to spin it right now. The Phillies continue to lose series after series, and coming out of the All-Star break, where the hope, I think, had been, they'll go off. They are sending the most All-Stars to the game in the entire history of the Phillies franchise. They're going to come out of the All-Star break, and they're going to look great, and everybody's going to feel hunky-dory about it, and we're all going to just be able to take a big collective breath, a big collective sigh of relief. That hasn't happened because the Phillies just dropped a series to the Guardians, after dropping a series to the Twins, after dropping a series to the Pirates, after dropping a series to the Oakland A's, and one has to have at least a little bit of a concern that things have gone very awry for this team. Now, it is a very expensive team. It's a team that has a lineup that is supposed to be one of the best in all of Major League Baseball, and yet it's a lineup that had a significant issue in Sunday's game at taking advantage of a pitcher who was making his first start of the year. Now, the Phillies were as well. But it was the first time that Joey Cantillo had taken the mound for the Guardians. And they got him out in 3 1/3 innings, but that's not the point. You got 3 runs against him. That's not good enough. For a Phillies team that is supposed to be a team that takes advantage of bad pitching, for a Phillies team with a lineup that is supposed to be the best in baseball, or a top 3 lineup consistently in baseball, you have to be able to get more than 3 runs. You have to be able to right some wrongs. You have to be able to get the train back on the tracks and pick up a series win. The Guardians are a good team. They're not a generational team. They're a team that you should be able to beat, especially at home, given just how raucous Citizens Bank Park can be. And yet the Phillies weren't that. The Phillies had a significant issue yesterday. Kyle Schwarber went out and had himself a hell of a game. 2 home runs. The rest of the lineup went 2 for 13 against the rookie star. It was bad. It was truly a horrific performance by the Phillies. And now there are concerns because the Phillies don't appear to be motivated to make significant additions ahead of the trade deadline. They went out and they got an outfielder who essentially is going to be, I would argue, a platoon player from Baltimore. Dombrowski said no, he's not. He's not a platoon guy. They think that he's going to be significantly better than that. This team needed an actual outfield bat. Getting Austin Hayes isn't the be-all, end-all. It's not the move that's supposed to jettison you or shake this lineup back into whatever kind of mental headspace they're supposed to be in to be a dominant team. No, it didn't do that. It won't do that. He's a decent player. He's not a fantastic one. Now we go over to some of the comments that came out. Rob Thompson said, I do not see him as a platoon, to tell you the truth. This guy was an all-star last season. For whatever reason, and I don't know Baltimore's situation, but he wasn't playing every single day, so I think that's maybe affected his numbers a bit. I want to see what we have here. And also said that he's likely to get some run against Cleveland and then against the Yankees, even against right-handed pitching. It's a concern, though, and it should be, because just because a guy was an all-star doesn't mean that he's a legitimate all-star, right? Like, you can make an all-star game because you had a really good first half of a season. It doesn't mean that you're going to forever be an all-star level player. Now, Austin Hayes against lefties this year, 72 at-bats, hitting .328 with an .894 OPS. That's fantastic. He's not been that good against righties. It's not looked the same. He's a good player. He might actually be one of your best options. I'm going to come back to something, though, that I think should be at least discussed a little bit. If Austin Hayes is what the Phillies view is the best option, the best outfield option on the market, on the trade market, within their price range, wouldn't it then be fair to question, well, could there be somebody who can maybe play first base? Like, could Bryce Harper just go back out and play right field? And like, maybe you can find somebody who's got like a more consistent bat or can bring more power to your lineup to play first base. It doesn't have to be somebody who you're trying to bring in to have a long-term contract. It could just be somebody that you're trying to bring in to be that big bat for the second half of the season and add a little bit more consistency in your lineup and add another threat to your lineup come the postseason. It could be somebody who's going to be on an expiring deal. It could be a player who's about to try to cash in on a big payday. Hell, it could be a 35-year-old who's looking to sign that one last contract in the offseason. If there's a better option at first base, then it would make the most sense in the world to say, hey, Bryce Harper, you're our most expensive player. We've committed to you. You said prior to the season you wanted an extension. Do what's best for the team. Go play the outfield. And we're going to go and bring somebody in at first base who could be more of an impact player. But it doesn't appear that's what they're doing. And based on those comments, not only by Thompson, but the ones that Dombrowski had as well, it does not appear that they think they have to go out and get any more help, that Austin Hayes is going to be that guy. Fine. I think they're wrong, but fine. That then takes us to another acquisition that the Phillies made over the weekend, and that, of course, is Carlos Estevez. Now, if you're sitting back and you're saying, hold on a second, I thought it was Estevez. No, Estevez. Why do we know that? Well, good question, Craig. Because in Spanish, when a word ends in a Z, the natural accent goes on the last syllable. The only way that you can override that is by adding an accent mark of your own. So Estevez, if that's what you wanted, would have had to have the accent on the first D. If you had no accent, it'd be Estevez. Estevez. It's not that. So, second syllable. Estevez. Okay. So Carlos Estevez, who is he? Why do we care? Well, he plays for played up until now for that team that has that certain guy from Jersey who people for some reason wanted to play for the Phillies, even though he can't stay healthy, has never contributed in a meaningful way in the postseason and has a lot of great regular season stats. So Carlos Estevez, let's talk about him. He had a great time playing for the Angels. And he had some decent seasons. And he's racked up plenty of saves. Last year he had 31 saves for the Angels. Perfectly fine. He has 20 saves already this season. He would appear to be the guy that the Phillies plan on slotting into the ninth inning. Maybe they've had enough of seeing Jose Alvarado. Maybe they've had enough of seeing whatever Soto's going to be in lower leverage situations, and they think there's absolutely no way that he's going to be able to play. Perhaps it's that. But here we go. Craig has it pulled up. Estevez was an all-star for the Angels in 2023. He's been even better this season. He's thrown 34 innings, a 2.38 ERA, a 0.735 whip, has only walked 5 batters all season, 32 strikeouts, 20 saves for the Angels. Now, there are some baseball people who feel like those numbers, while very impressive, aren't necessarily indicative of the player, and also the Angels are one of the least stressful environments to play in because the Angels are the Angels, and the Angels are not the Phillies. The Angels are not playing in the NL East. They're not playing in a highly competitive division with a ton of expectations. The Angels are 14 games under 500. There's no one right now who is trying to make the argument that Carlos Estevez has had to do anything this season in a high leverage situation, in a situation that actually does matter outside of those 9 innings in which his team is playing, because the Angels stink, and they always stink, and they will forever stink. I digress. Oh, look at this. Craig, I'm on all these other screens. I didn't even see you had this pulled up. Is he an upgrade over Sir Anthony Dominguez? Yes, based on how Sir Anthony pitched this year, he is. Is he going to be relied upon more than an Orion Kerkering? Of course he will. But Dombrowski, who is trying to sell you on the idea of what Hayes is going to be, has now gone out and said that Estevez is one of the best relievers in baseball this past year. One of the best. One of the best. Not the best. But there are many, and he is better than many of them. He is one of the best. Last month, he was the relief pitcher of the month. Holy shit. This is where we are. This is where we are. All right? As you're trying to kind of come to grips with the fact that the Phillies have lost a bunch of series in a row, that the bats have gone cold for far too much of it, that there are concerns because Ranger Suarez is hurt again. You're one more Zach Wheeler back stiffness away from things really getting interesting. Now you have Dave Dombrowski saying, he was the relief pitcher of the month in the month of July in the American League. He's retired 53 of 58 hitters. He can pitch the ninth inning. He's got 20 saves. And this is how Topper determines he's going to use him. We'll see, but it wouldn't surprise me if he gets a lot of ninth innings and slides people behind. So that's all fine and dandy, except that, you would hope that the president of baseball ops and the manager have already had the conversation. How Topper decides to use him. I'm pretty sure that if you're going to trade away 2 prospects, that you've at least had that conversation. He's probably going to be your ninth inning guy. He comes here with 20 saves. Why the hell not? Give it a shot. If at this point the team has decided that Alvarado is no longer the guy that they trust the most in the ninth inning and they need to bring somebody in, fine. Is Estevez going to wow anybody? It's possible. Like, if he performs at the level that he has so far in a low leverage situation in Los Angeles, I always want to say Anaheim, if he performs the same way in Philly, then yes, he will be loved. He will be appreciated. Phillies fans are going to absolutely be thrilled with the fact that they have a guy who can be a lockdown closer and really put games away in a way that it feels like a lot of the fan base believed Alvarado no longer could. So he's a fine acquisition. The real problem here, and I've come back to this many times at this point, and I feel like I'm losing my mind, is the Phillies have other holes. And I'm going to keep coming back to it, but the rotation remains an issue. Because if Ranger Suarez is going to continue to be in and out with injuries, you know that Zach Wheeler has had injury concerns in the past. You know that Aaron Nola can be inconsistent as anything in the game of baseball. Christopher Sanchez, really good player, has outpitched all expectations. If any of those things come back down to earth, all of a sudden the 8.5 game lead that you have in the NL East could go away. Here's why things are actually even more problematic, though. Okay? And I promise you, I'm not sitting here trying to sell doom and gloom and that the entirety of this magical season is about to turn into a nightmare. But while we can all sit back and say, hey, the Phillies have gone 3-7 over the last 10 games. Well, the Braves went 4-6. So you're still 8.5 games up. That's fine. But there isn't a little bit of a complicating factor. The Mets, I know the Mets, we can all laugh and joke about the Mets, but the Mets are over 500 over their last 10 games, and the Mets are now only a game and a half behind the Braves. I like the idea of being able to put your foot on the neck of the teams behind you and take them out of the game. Take them out. Get any thought they have of making the postseason out of their heads. Get any thought that they have of trying to challenge you for the NL East out of their heads. The Phillies haven't been able to do that. They weren't able to do that about a month ago when they played the Braves. And I said, hey, legitimate opportunity here. When you go to Atlanta, you win 2 of 3, you sweep that series, you've effectively knocked them, for the most part, out of contending for the NL East. Things are about to get a whole lot more interesting because now it's not just you have to be way ahead of the Braves. You also have the Mets kind of nipping at their heels. And if the Phillies continue to struggle and the Mets were to get hot, then all of a sudden you do have 2 teams that feel like they're relatively within striking distance and are perhaps an acquisition or 2 ahead of the deadline away. And I know that the deadline's virtually here, but the Mets could potentially now sell themselves on the idea that Cohen's going to open up his checkbook and have at it. And maybe they'll be willing to go out and make an acquisition or 2, and all of a sudden the NL East race gets a little bit more hectic. Now, I'll play the positive side of it. The Phillies look largely complacent. They look like a fat pig who's been stuffed and stuffed and stuffed and is just content to roll around in the mud for a bit. That's what the Phillies look like. They don't look like a highly motivated team. They don't look like a hungry team. They don't look like a team that feels like they have to play their best baseball every day to stay neck and neck with the Braves in the NL East. They look like a team that has gotten very comfortable with being 8+ games up in this division. And now the hitters, when they go cold, they go very cold. And it's unfortunate because if you think about what this lineup is from top to bottom, they should have enough in this lineup that 3 or 4 guys could stay on for the most part, and you could still go out and outslug teams and still walk away with winning 2 out of 3 and winning a bunch of series. But again, since the All-Star break, they have failed to do it. And it's great to have a game on Sunday, like you get Kyle Schwarber to hit 2 home runs, but when the rest of the lineup can't take advantage of a guy who's in his first start of the season, it's a legitimate concern, and it's not being a Negadelphian to sit back and say, there are concerns. Was this team on pace to have a historic season? Yes. Could they still potentially put together a historic season? Yes. Does it look like right now, given some of the holes they have, and given the fact that this lineup has now demonstrated to you over an extended period of time that it can go cold at the same time? Does pointing that out make you a Negadelphian? It certainly does not. I think the Phillies still need to add. I still would like to see them add another arm to the rotation. All of this is also without, mentioning the fact that the Phillies don't believe they can stretch Turnbull back out to be a starter. And he would have been, in my opinion, the guy that you would have looked to. Certainly not Taijuan Walker. You would have looked at maybe can we get Turnbull back into the rotation based on how well he did before Walker came back and they jettisoned Turnbull back to the bullpen and then they tried to bring him back and then he got hurt. That appears to be off the table. This rotation cannot exist in its current form and make a historic run. This rotation will need everything to go right for it going into the postseason to give this team a legitimate chance of making it to and potentially winning a World Series. Right now, it feels like the Phillies are a very good team. They have all of the right parts, but those parts don't work together in the way that they need to. They are not a well-oiled machine. Sometimes you have those teams where it's the sum of the parts are better than the parts themselves. And right now, the Phillies look like a team where the parts individually are better than them all together because they don't all function as one. And they haven't since the All-Star break. All right, let's move on because there are 2 other teams that I want to talk about today. And if I don't get to something, I'll make sure to get to it on the Russ Joy Show every Tuesday and Friday at 8 a.m. on YouTube, live streaming there and also available wherever you get your podcasts. See, Craig's smiling on the other side of the glass because he knew that was coming. All right, so the Eagles are in a little bit of an interesting spot. And they're in an interesting spot for a few reasons. One, training camp opened up last week. And when training camp opens up, that leads me to the same very dark place. And I end up in this dark place every training camp. I absolutely hate, detest, despise everything there is about the play-by-play monitoring of what's happening at training camp. I probably hate more about training camp coverage than any other coverage in any other sport when it comes to these games don't matter, these practices are largely irrelevant, and yet we have people who go out and they track stats. They track Jalen Hurts' reps at practice. They track how many passes a guy drops. Like, what the hell difference does it make? I said this to Kincaid on Thursday, and I thought about it more and more and more and more and more. We don't do this with the other teams in this city. You don't get a shot tracking metric tweeted out at Flyers training camp. Charlie O'Connor tracks stats far more than anyone else I remember being around when I was down covering games on press row, right? Like, he tracks that stuff. I don't remember him saying, like, Travis Konechny has attempted 16 shots over the last 2 days. He's missed the net on 5 of them, high to the right. Like, if he's not doing that for the Flyers, right? And if I don't recall anybody like an Anthony Sanfilippo who loves stats, or a Big Bet Bob Wankel going down and saying, well, Alec Boehm took 10 swings at batting practice in his first round, and he only made significant contact on 6 of them, and only 3 went outside of the infield. If they're not doing that, and if, well, Kinker doesn't go down and cover the Sixers anymore, but like, if I don't see a Kyle Neubeck or a Derek Bodner or a Rich Hoffman, if I don't see one of them saying, hey, you know, we just watched Joel Embiid go through a free throw circuit, and he went 5 of 8 from the foul line. Then he attempted corner threes, and he made, 6 of 15. If they're not doing that, and I've now covered 3 of the teams, right? If they're not doing that, why do we need that for the Eagles? Like, why? I understand that the Eagles are different, that the Eagles are the biggest show in town. I get it. I understand it. You don't actually have to answer my mostly rhetorical question. But my big point here is, why do we care, and do we actually care, how guys are performing at training camp? I got to take a sip. I'm trying to power through this, Craig. Like, why do people care? And I'm going to go to the person who's most notorious for it, right? He's not the only one, though. But like, Elliott Shore-Parks is the one who tracks Jalen Hurts' passing reps, right? So I'm actually going to pull one of these up. Craig, I'm going to send this over to you for you to pull up on the screen because I find it fascinating. And maybe if it were only done like this, I would be fine. But I think what triggers me about it is that we get the play-by-play on every play in addition to this. I think that this as a stat at the end of a week of practice maybe isn't actually as worthless as I might otherwise feel like it is. Craig, let's bring that up. So Elliott Shore-Parks put this tweet out on Sunday evening. Eagles training camp stats, days 1 through 3. Quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts, 48 of 55, 1 touchdown. He took 86 reps. Kenny Pickett, 24 of 30, 50 reps. McKee, 16 of 19, 25 reps. And then he's got everything down for the wide receivers and the tight ends. All of these are targets from quarterbacks. A.J. Brown, 10 targets, 10 catches. Devontae Smith, 10 targets, 8 catches. Going through that kind of stuff. Then he gets to running backs. Saquon Barkley, 14 total touches, 8 carries, 6 carries. I think that's supposed to be 6 catches. Fine. And all of it was with the first team. If I look at that and I say, hey, at the end of a week's worth of practice, this is what it looks like, I don't actually hate this. I think that for the most part, if people decide that that is meaningful content and it's something they want, then I think Elliott Shore-Parks or any other writer who's doing that are well within their right to do it. And that doesn't piss me off too much. What does piss me off, though, is the rest of it, which is the legitimate play-by-play. I don't need John Ross with another really nice catch. He's having a strong day. Pickett is such an upgrade over Mariota. He's having a good camp so far. Devontae Smith with an absurd catch over Keel Ringo deep. I don't care. Why should I care? The wild thing is, it does appear that people care. I just don't know why. Like, if I go down ESP's timeline of him doing the play-by-play, You get a tweet that has like 600 likes because it's A.J. Brown completes a catch. There's no video, there's no picture, but 600 likes. You'll get something about like Huff getting nice pressure on Hurts, 300 likes. I don't play. This is where I come back to like, I hate this content. I genuinely do. I think it's a waste. I think it's stupid. And I think the part that's worse is that almost all of the writers are doing the same thing, where they're all giving you the play-by-play. But when it comes to engagement, I get why they do it, because it does look like, for whatever reason, people care. And I guess, you can kind of extrapolate that same idea to like, why is it that WIP talks about the Eagles all the time, and it's like the other teams don't exist for the most part? Because the ratings indicate that people do want to listen to them talk about the Eagles. I, as a consumer of content, might think that it's an absolute waste. It's not particularly good, not particularly like well thought out. It's not really creative, but people apparently care about it. But I don't like it. I'm allowed to have that opinion. I don't think it's particularly great. All right, so that's where that's happened. That's not actually the biggest story, in my opinion, around what's going on with the Eagles. Now, a couple of the clips that we're going to play here are from about a week ago, 10 days ago. But one of them got resurfaced over the past week. So, Craig, I sent both of those over to you. I guess go in the order that I sent them over. But there is a very fascinating rumor out there that Bill Belichick is actively monitoring what's happening with the Eagles and what's happening with head coach Nick Sirianni. And depending on the outlet, might be monitoring what's happening with Dallas. But that the Eagles are potentially his preferred location. Craig, let's go to that. Hit the full screen on it before you share it. Hit the little full screen toggle on the video on the Twitter. There we go. All right, now we'll bring it up. I just want you to hear, this was up on NBC Sports Boston. We can actually scrub to about the 50% mark there, Craig. Go to about halfway. Because they're talking about Belichick and him being out of the game. But I want people to hear this.
Having everyone forget 2022 and 2023 and the misery of a rain-soaked New York Jets loss at the end of the season in which the team had 6 first downs. No one thinks about that anymore. They think about confetti and Lombardis.
And I'll say this, Bert would know better than I across the league, no question about it. The Eagles, to me, are not a fit. Like, Howie Roseman has hired the young offensive coach. He can handle the personnel. Belichick will want input on personnel, maybe even control. I would just look at the Cowboys and the Giants, and especially early in the season, where the Giants ownership is probably among the most impatient in the entire league. And we all know Mike McCarthy's going into a contract year down in Dallas. This might happen before we get to Thanksgiving.
I think the Eagles are the likely.
Wow.
I do.
Giants
I do. He loves his Howie Roseman.
So to me, like, that's interesting because it's NBC Sports Boston. Now, Craig, go to the other clip around the 35-second mark. This is, I think, the thing that ended up going around. There was an account, which I don't remember now. It looked like it was kind of like an NFL news aggregator account. But they were talking about Jeremy Fowler, who's, a writer for ESPN. He's a senior NFL reporter for the worldwide leader in sports. Go to about the 35-second mark, hit the full screen, and then we'll bring it up. But Jeremy Fowler had something really interesting to say about Belichick as well, and it had to do with the Eagles, which again is something I find absolutely fascinating. All right, let's go to this clip.
Of power than it was a year ago, and I think the shock value is still high. Like, what just happened in New England and why did it fall apart? And do we really want to give Bill Belichick all this control at his age? But like, if Philly opens, it's just a perfect fit for me, in my opinion. I think he would want that job in the worst way, is my sense.
So you feel like the Eagles is the job? If let's say hypothetically he had an option for all of those, you would think the Eagles is the one that's most attractive.
Eagles and Dallas.
Got it.
And just because, like, look, big names ready to win now, right? Philly ready to win. Dallas ready to win. Coaches that know that and have to get it done in a ready-to-win situation. Nick Sirianni and Mike McCarthy, they're both in that situation. So if one of those opens or both opens, I could certainly see it. But the Joneses have a long-standing relationship with Bill Belichick. I could see it happening.
So that is really interesting on a whole other level, right? So the NBC Sports Boston clip, they mentioned he really likes Howie Roseman. This one with Fowler, essentially like it's a team that is meant to win now. There's not a rebuild. The pieces are in place. Like, look, it kind of depends on, I guess, what you think Bill Belichick is, and did he have any responsibility? I feel like there's been a lot of retconning, and there's been a lot of revisionist history about Bill Belichick's impact on the Patriots dynasty, because Tom Brady went on to go win a Super Bowl with the Bucs, and Bill Belichick did not replicate the success once Brady was gone. I think that he had just kind of come to the end of the tenure there, and it is really hard once you have reached the pinnacle, and in fairness, reached a pinnacle that very few, if any, have ever reached, to go back to that many Super Bowls, to win that many Super Bowls with the same quarterback. I don't know if there is a way to rebound after that and to go out and do it all over. I really don't. I don't think Belichick ever was going to be able to, even if you're of the mindset that he's the best coach of all time, I don't even know if the best coach of all time can continue and try to find that next quarterback and be able to still have the same voice and the same impact with a locker room full of players who are no longer used to winning the same way that they had with Brady. The accountability part becomes a question. The question of whether or not the message gets lost. All of that kind of becomes a bigger issue. When Belichick didn't end up getting the Falcons job this past offseason, a lot of people thought that it was a sign that people genuinely thought within football circles that Bill Belichick either wasn't as good as everyone had believed he was, or perhaps was looking for far too much say over personnel. And like, while those might be valid concerns, I think it was pretty clear that like, at least in terms of teams that looked like they might be ready to win, the Cowboys and the Eagles were at the top of that list. And the second that it became apparent that McCarthy and Sirianni were going to be brought back, that to me was kind of like Bill Belichick going, all right, I'm not desperate enough to get back in the coaching game that I want to go take a shitty job. I would rather hold out a year, even though he's not a young guy. He dates very young women, allegedly. Very young women. Could be his granddaughter. Not ideal. I think it's pretty gross. That's just me. There might be a 70-something-year-old guy listening to the podcast right now dating a 20-something-year-old. You're very sick. There is something legitimately wrong with you, and you can unsubscribe from the podcast. And if you have a problem, go send an email to kevin.kincaid@crossingboard.com. Okay? That's not actually his email. See, I got you there, old man. Anyway, there's something weird about that. But Belichick, despite being old, might be able to say, like, look, I'm not looking to find a job for the next 10 years. I want to go out and win one more Super Bowl, because I think Belichick is a smart enough guy to realize that the narrative of who was really responsible for the Patriots dynasty has gotten away from him. The second that Brady left and won a title without Belichick, there became immense pressure on Belichick to be able to go out and win a Super Bowl without Brady. So if you're Bill Belichick, why would you even want to take over? I know that he was rumored to be very far along in the process with the Falcons, but like, why would you want to take over that team? Take a team that is ready. Take a team that you could make the argument has a very good roster and perhaps has had subpar coaching in the Dallas Cowboys. Say what you want about Dak. I think Dak is still a very good quarterback. I know that he doesn't get it done in big moments. Like, I get it. We all follow the Eagles in the NFC East here. But do I think Bill Belichick could make the Cowboys a winner? Yes, I do think that he actually could, which would be very problematic for the Eagles. Do I think that Bill Belichick looks at the Eagles as an opportunity where you have an experienced defensive coordinator, Nick Fangio, a very smart, bright offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore? And do I think he would look at the situation and say, yeah, I could certainly figure out a way to coach a team that has Jalen Hurts surrounded by A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, Saquon Barkley. Yeah, I think I'm okay. Arguably the best offensive line in football, although we have to see if Cam can, really replace Jason Kelce. Fine. I'm pretty sure he looks at that team and says, yeah, I fuck with that. I'm pretty sure he does. I'm pretty sure he could. And so I'm not actually surprised in the aftermath that, like, as these reports come out and as these like little tidbits are getting dropped at a regional network and then from a national pundit in Fowler, I am not surprised that he wouldn't have taken a subpar job if he has been playing the longer game of McCarthy or Sirianni will probably be fired at the end of this year. A very good chance, because whether it's the Cowboys ownership, whether it's Eagles ownership, they are apparently aware that, Belichick is kind of holding out. And if your head coach doesn't work out for you again, you have his number. I'm here for it. I know I shouldn't be. I know that I shouldn't be here for the Bill Belichick discourse, but I'm here for it. Nick Sirianni, if all goes well this year, will have been relegated to designated pom-pom holder. DPPH, designated pom-pom holder. Nick Sirianni, comma, DPPH. That'll be his nameplate at NovaCare, okay? If all goes well, if all goes according to plan. Vic Fangio has full autonomy over the defense. Kellen Moore has full autonomy over the offense. I don't know what Nick Sirianni is supposed to do. He can manage egos or something. It really doesn't matter. I don't care. Not my problem. But if things don't go well, if you don't compete for a Super Bowl this year and Bill Belichick is interested in the job, hell to the yeah. I'm 100% in. Go get arguably the greatest head football coach of all time. I'm fine rolling the dice with that for a year or two, without question. All right, so we're done on the Eagles. Now we have one thing left to get to. Your team, your town, your Philadelphia Flyers. What the fuck is happening with Alexei Kolosov? What's going on? We talked about this over on the Russ Joy Show, which you can find on YouTube at the Russ Joy Show or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm getting Craig. I'm going to get him again. I'm going to get him to smile. There it is. So we talked about Alexei Kolosov. We actually talked about it about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. A little bit of an update where I kind of tried to pull back the curtain a little bit. I've not spoken to Alexei Kolosov. All right, I've not directly spoken to him. I've taken some tidbits of what I've been gathering from behind the scenes, looking at the timeline a little bit. What is happening? Because if you go on Twitter and you're focusing in on Flyers reporters and Flyers stuff, you will have noticed by now that there was a report going around from Philly Hockey Now. I don't know if it was Carchides, the one who wrote it, or if it's Bailey, I guess, is another writer they have. I feel bad not knowing the guy's name, but that's his last name. I do know that. I have not read his stuff previously. I have looked at the comments section about some of the stuff. I've looked at the replies to the original story, and it's a little bit problematic. So there was a reporter who covers the AHL, whose name I always butcher, and I do apologize to Tony, because it's Tony Androkidis, I believe is how you say it. Okay. So Tony goes out, and at the end of last week, he put out a tweet about how things were a little bit iffy with Alexei Kolosov, the Belarusian goalie who was to be brought over at the end of last season. Was there a promise that he was going to be given the backup spot at the NHL level? Was he going to be somebody who was going to be given time to compete for the starting spot with Lehigh Valley, especially going down the stretch as they were going to try to make the playoffs? All of it got blown up. Ivan Fedotov came over after Kolosov had already kind of committed to leaving Dynamo Minsk. He's waiting on his visa. Fedotov shows up in the U.S., visa at the ready, suiting up for the Flyers as the backup. Kolosov comes over. He barely plays. And Tony goes and puts out a tweet about how there had been the thought or the feeling that maybe Kolosov had kind of felt not great about it. So his tweet was, per AHL source, Alexei Kolosov told the Flyers at the end of his stint with Lehigh Valley he did not want to return. They put him in a hotel by himself and he felt isolated, especially since his English isn't great. So that was the quote. That was what was brought up, okay? Well, this guy over at Philly Hockey Now took that quote and turned it into a story that had a very reckless and wild title that was essentially that the Flyers abandoned Alexei Kolosov in a hotel room. And that wasn't great either. So then you had people like Bill Meltzer over the weekend, who on Sunday said, abandon him in a 4-star hotel directly attached to the PPL Center. No one showed him how to get around. He didn't eat. The bus left without him and he had to run behind it, like rerunning what's happening. So like Bill Meltzer was kind of like, yo, dude, this is kind of bullshit. Now, Bill Meltzer's not exactly the guy who goes on Twitter and says, yo, you're full of shit. But like, yeah, point out when there's some stuff that's, iffy, right? So anyway, all of this happens, we start to kind of piece things together behind the scenes of what actually happened. And was Kolosov abandoned by the Flyers? The short answer is no. Could they have done more? Yes. We're going to end on a cliffhanger. Go subscribe to the Russ Joy Show. We'll pick up with that on Tuesday. Plus, we'll have more reaction from training camp. We'll have more about the Phillies. We'll have much more about other things going on in the sports world. I want to thank everybody who joined us on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you end up finding the show, or if you listen in the podcast feed. I look forward to talking to all of you on Tuesday morning on the Russ Joy Show. We'll be back with the Crossing broadcast on Thursday. Russ Joy Show again on Friday. I want to thank Craig on the other side of the glass. In the meantime, you can tweet at me. Tell me if I'm right. Tell me if I'm wrong. On Twitter, @JoyOnBroad. For Craig, who's on the other side of the glass, I'm Russ. Thanks for watching, maybe even listening to Crossing Broadcast. We'll talk to all of you